This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. So welcome back, everyone, to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Today we have an awesome guest who also has her own podcast, Julie Gayheart, otherwise known in the hiking world as Jester. Welcome to the podcast. Why don't you let everybody know a little bit about yourself and your podcast?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to be on. I really appreciate it. Nice introduction there. I'm Julie Jester Gayheart, and I don't know. It took me 12 years. I'm a section hiker. It took me 12 years to section hike the Appalachian Trail. That's probably what I'm most known for now. I do have a podcast, which is part of the Hiking Radio Network. It is called Jester Section Hiker. And we're just trying to give section hikers a little bit of love and a platform to get their stories out as well on the podcast. I'm an educator by day, but really, like all of us, we're hikers at heart. So that's a short introduction. So here we go.
So I was kind of drawn to your podcast because, being someone who's thru hiked, that's all you know is thru hiker this, thru hike. You have this whole, it's like a completely different mentality. And I always tell people that I know thru hikers how jealous I am of people who decided to section hike rather than thru hike. Because we always complain about like, oh, it's so grueling and we didn't get to see anything because we're too busy hiking. So from a section hiking perspective, what is kind of like your motivation to keep going? Because I know a lot of thru hikers, if they're off the trail, done. They never come back. So to keep going, I mean, that's a year after year. You started in what, 2006? The AT? It took you 11 years to do the whole trail?
Yeah, 12 summers. Finished in 2017.
So what was that? What was it like for you to come back every year? Like, what was your perspective on that?
Well, I tell people it's a love affair with the Appalachian Trail. I mean, because most people, they don't stay married that long. So when I get asked this question, I mean, literally, the Appalachian Trail is my first love of my life. As a kid, I grew up, my father always talked about, hiking on, and I spent a lot of time fishing with my dad. And I think it was almost his dream to hike the Appalachian Trail. And somewhere along the way as a kid, I just knew growing up, I didn't know when, didn't know how, didn't know what, that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And somewhere along the way in my adult life, I convinced a couple girlfriends of mine to go out on a backpacking trip on the AT, and it kind of went from there. So to get back to your question, when I first saw those white blazes, I literally fell in love with the trail. Goosebumps, like, oh my God, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it never crossed my mind that I was even a section hiker. It never crossed my mind. I knew what thru hikers were, and I just thought thru hikers were like the coolest people. It was people that had retired and, they're out living their dream and hiking the trail, or it was young people that didn't either go straight off to college or they didn't go to their career and they were out hiking the trail. And I was kind of somewhere in the middle, and I just loved the trail and I wanted to be out there, and I just wanted to try to get out there as much as possible. And it kind of evolved into this thing. The first few years, like I said, it was a love affair, and it kind of just went from there.
I've always wanted to go back to the Appalachian Trail. So as you obviously are down south. I believe you said North Carolina. You have access, Charlotte. You have access to the trail a lot more easily than I do in Ohio. And kind of, I really want to revisit some of the earlier stuff because it's been 5 years, and I'm just like, I forgot a lot about. I remember these places, and people talk about them, and I was like, oh, I was there, but it's gone. I want to go back and section hike some of the bigger areas that I can't really recall from like just drudging through. What would you recommend for someone like me to re-envision the trail? Where would I go? It's been so long. I haven't been out there.
Well, first thing that comes to mind is Carver's Gap area, the Roan Highlands, Roan Mountain, Grayson Highlands with the ponies, Max Patch. I mean, the first real bald that, and you smiled when I said that. Everybody, you as a thru hiker, Max Patch. It's that bald before, and then you're excited. You're trying to get down into Hot Springs, North Carolina. It's like, yeah, I'm going to get into Hot Springs. We're going to party. We're going to go to the hot tubs and all that kind of stuff. And then, the Smoky Mountains, of course. And I'm just naming all the things in the South. I mean, you have the beautiful areas. You could always rehike the White Mountains. And I mean, Maine itself, just to go and spend, a couple weeks back in Maine and really slow down. And if you remember in Maine, pretty much you can swim every day in Maine, all those wonderful ponds. And Maine is very hard hiking, but, just I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm just thinking, I can't even remember the name of all the ponds, but it's just like you get into Maine and everything changes. The air smells different. The terrain is different from the whites. And for a thru hiker, you guys are like, yeah, I'm heading to the end. And, you may have rushed through Maine, but I would definitely, even going through Mahoosic Notch. And I looked forward to Mahoosic Notch as a section hiker. I was deadly afraid of Mahoosic Notch until I actually got to Mahoosic Notch. And then I was like, all right, this isn't as bad. Yeah, you still have to go over the boulders, everything, but it's not what it was built up to be. But for me, it was a fun mile. Before I got there, it was a scary mile. So I kind of changed my perspective once I got there. But for the South, I would say 100% come on back down to Max Patch. I'll meet you there. And then we'll go over and explore some of the Black Mountains. How about that?
Now that sounds like a good time. I do remember Max Patch. It's just like ingrained into your brain, like these highlights, and it's so amazing. Did you do the trail in any specific orders, or did you just kind of pick sections out of, I want to go here now, or I want to go here? Or did you kind of just like all the way up?
It started off that way. It started off, there was no order. We actually went to an outfitter, did the whole traditional thing. None of us had any gear, went in, they saw us coming. You need this, and everything. And the pack weighed 50 pounds. And we even carried bear containers with us on our first trip. Ridiculous. But, oh my goodness. Oh, so the guy working at the outfitter, he was like, oh, you should go to Davenport Gap and you should hike to Hot Springs. And we were like, oh, okay, well, that's the closest place for us to get to, because like we discussed, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And like I said, I fell in love with the trail. And then the next year, we went from Sam's Gap through Irwin, Tennessee, up over the Roan Highlands, and kind of somewhat went in order. But after that, there was no order. Then it was like, okay, I want to go through the Smokies. And then once I got into summer 5, 6, 7, that's when I really started like, okay, I need to fill in the gaps here. This is going to take forever type of thing. I don't want to be on the 45-year section hiker plan at this point. So really started to go back in, went down to Georgia, started filling things in, but still didn't end in a traditional way. My section hike ended in Rangeley, Maine. So I don't know if you remember Route 4 right there at Rangeley, Maine. There's like a unique Appalachian Trail sign. It's this like big AT wooden sign, and it's brown. It's very unique. You don't see one of those very often. Yeah, you blew right. You're shaking your head no, so you blew right by that thing.
Nope, don't remember it at all.
So my hike, to answer your question, not traditional whatsoever.
Did you like, I don't know, did you notice any kind of changes over the years? Because 12 years is a pretty significant time span over time. I mean, how has the trail changed from 2006 to 2017?
That is a great question, and probably the number one thing I will say. The trail itself, the brown footpath, trail groups and things like that, they redo trail to try to, save certain areas and things like that. So the path itself, I would say, is probably not changed much, because I have actually re-hiked a lot of it in the South multiple times. The number one thing for me is technology. So when we started out in 2006, no cell phones. I remember our little section. We carried calling cards. Do you even know what a calling card is? That's the question.
I do. I do know what a calling card is. I'm in that gap where I still remember some of these things.
So we carried calling cards. We thought we were out in the wild, and I had these paper maps. I mean, right now, honestly, I have no clue where I even got them from. I may have ordered them from the ATC, is what I'm thinking. And I used my calling card one time at a payphone in Hot Springs, North Carolina. And the call was like, "Oh, I'm alive. We've made it to Hot Springs. We're good to go, and I'll see you in 5 days," kind of thing. So, as far as I know, it's hilarious. So yeah, so the technology, and then over the years, even in those early years, I remember it was taboo to even talk on the phone. I mean, if you went by a hiker and somebody saw you on the phone, or they heard a radio playing from, because people used to carry radios on the outside of their packs. I mean, you were looked at like, "Oh my God, you're ruining my outdoor experience." So we've gone totally from that to everybody's got a smartphone, everybody's texting, everybody's using gut hook, to full accessibility almost on the AT. You know where every road crossing is. I mean, practically through gut hook. And the AWOL guide did not exist. I think I used something around the 2008, 2009 period. It was called the Thru Hiker's Companion. And I'm pretty sure AWOL himself purchased, I think this is how it went down, the Thru Hiker's Companion. And then actually it is now the AT guide. I don't know if AWOL is actually involved with the guide anymore. So now everybody seems to be using the AWOL guide and gut hook. And none of that existed. So when you went out, you kind of just knew where you're going to start, knew where you were going to be picked up. I mean, I don't even remember researching on the internet. So the number one thing that's changed for me is certainly technology.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the, I mean, on your podcast, you're always talking a lot about gear, and you have a lot of people that are, doing this stuff more recently, and people from the past. And like, I always say that, like, when I did it, I was so spoiled because I did have gut hooks. I did have all of the technology. If I was lost on a road crossing, I could pull up a map and scroll out and see, oh, there's a town, 3 miles away. So, like, I can't imagine going back in time when it was, like, actually way harder. I personally would say that it was probably more difficult. The gear wasn't as light, and now we can spend, you and I could go the rest of this podcast and talk about ounces and packs and those big external frame packs they used to have back in the day. It was like,
oh my God. I mean, yeah, that's what a lot of people, and speaking of gear, it's kind of funny because I went through this whole transformation, when I first started, it was literally how much could you put in the pack? It was, let's get these 60, 65 liter packs and let's fill them to the top. Like, how much can we put in here? And that was the mentality. Nobody was out there that I remember in those early years. Now, I do remember following, I don't know if you've heard of a guy, Andrew Skirtka. I remember he was the first blogger that I followed while he was out on the Appalachian Trail.
I loved his books, yeah.
Yeah, and I just it's like I fell in love with him because he was out through hiking the trail. And he was like the first one that started talking about, that I knew of kind of in my era of starting, like lightening your load, getting stuff out of your pack you don't need. There were not cottage companies out there like ULA and Z-Packs and Hyperlight. That didn't exist. I mean, you had a big old Osprey that weighed 5 or 6 pounds on its own. I mean, I had a Gregory. I mean, the thing was 6 pounds.
That's funny because my wife had the same pack probably when we hiked in 2015. Big, giant, gargantuan 5-pound pack. And I'm like, why did you get that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a Cadillac model for sure. I mean, it has all the padding around the waist belts, and, your shoulder straps had all the big, thick padding, and it was a monster.
So have you kind of gravitated more towards lighter weight now, or are you kind of just in the middle? Because I can't get a feel for if you actually are a gearhead or not on your podcast, because you let everybody else talk about it. I'm like, I don't know if she likes gear or not.
No, I don't call myself I don't consider myself a gearhead. I mean, I love researching gear and things like that. And I've kind of come twofold. Okay, so carry all this junk and everything you don't need. And then I went extreme where, I mean, I got caught in certain situations where I was without rain gear and stuff like that. So I've kind of morphed maybe somewhere in the middle. And to me, it's more about comfort. And I know, there's always the latest, greatest quilt. There's always the latest, greatest tent. There's always the latest, greatest gear. But I go based on absolutely 100% how am I going to be comfortable. And part of that is I sleep really, really cold. And I didn't know that until I started doing a lot of, backpacking and things like that. You don't learn that on your first section hike. You're out for 3 days and everything goes wrong. So, so I overcompensate probably with a sleeping bag, and my gear guy, he's after me to get a quilt.
Yeah.
And I will probably do it. And I have probably owned, I'm really not kidding when I tell you this number, 15 to 20 different sleeping pads just over the year, like trying to get comfortable. As far as pillows, I used to sleep on my dirty, nasty clothes. Well, I don't do that. I don't do that anymore. I've got to have a pillow. And they're so lightweight now. It's like, you don't even know. And my gear guy makes fun of me because I also have a Marmot. It's called a Hubba 1 tent, and it's like 2.1 something pounds, but it is a workhorse. And I'm like, I don't care if it's 2 pounds. I will lose 2 pounds of body weight because I love that tent.
I'm in that same boat with you. I mean, I have this room the other way that is facing is all gear. It's like a gear locker in my house, and I have a lot of it, but I really don't care what it is as long as it works. Like, I know about gear because we all know about gear because that's like the most popular topic, and as podcasters and hosts and stuff, we have to know about it a little bit. But like, I think people get too hung up on it, and it deters a lot of people from backpacking. Do you feel that way sometimes?
I do, because I mean, I can get hung up on it because I go, ooh, what's coming out this year? Ooh, what's doing that? And I did that with backpacks too. When I was switching out of my Gregory, I mean, I probably bought 2 or 3, $350 plus backpacks. And what I learned real quick is I have got to have some type of frame in my backpack. I cannot go frameless. I cannot stand feeling all of that stuff on my back. And somebody would say, well, you didn't pack it right. Well, believe me, I have, it just doesn't work for me. A frameless backpack, I don't care what anybody says, does not work for Jester. So, I have a frame pack, a frame pack, and it works for me. It's a ULA. And the only reason I gave up my Gregory, quite honestly, is because it stinks so bad. No, I mean, seriously. It's like...
Yeah. This guy right here.
Even though it weighs, I see that one in your background. Even though it weighs 5.5 pounds or whatever it is, I loved that thing. It's got a lot of miles on it. It's like I'm married to it, and I would compensate the weight for it, by buying lightweight gear to put inside of it. But eventually, I switched because, like I said, a skunk wouldn't want anything to do with that thing at this point.
Well, yeah, and it. I always I always tell people, because once you do something like this, section hike, through hike, whatever, even if you've gone backpacking, everybody wants to know what they need, and I never hardly ever give them brand names and stuff. I'm like, just get this 5 items and you're good. You can get them at Walmart, you can get them at REI, you can get them on Amazon. Just get something to start, because you'll never get on the trail if you sit there and worry about gear all day. Like, just don't worry about it. Right. So to get off the gear topic, because we could go all day on this, I'm interested. You have posted that you've done the Lobe Trail. Am I saying that wrong? More than likely.
Well, no, it's the Lobe Trail. So you were close. Yeah, Lobe. So Lobe Trail. It's a 30-mile trail here in Western North Carolina, and I don't know what your question is, but go.
Well, no, I don't know. From listening to your podcast, I've learned so many different trails I never knew existed, because I don't have time to research trails every day, so I'm always talking to people, and it's like, where are all these trails coming from? I'm going to go do some of these, because I'm like, where do I go next? What do I do? So what's kind of like the gist behind this Lobe Trail, and like, was it awesome? Was it like,
Well, it's absolutely amazing. And like you, I was introduced to the Lobe Trail back in 2011, actually by a gentleman by the name of Peter Barr. He actually has a book out hiking all of the 40 fire towers in North Carolina. So I got on this big quest that I was going to hike all the 40 fire towers in North Carolina. And I think I got 2 or 3 still to go to. But, he was the author, and I actually reached out to him and I said, do you have any little hidden gem trails that would be good for shakedowns and things like that? And he goes, oh my goodness, you have got to go to the Lobe Trail. It has everything encompassed in the Appalachian Trail in 2,100 miles in 30 miles.
Wow.
And he was right. I was like, oh, well, how hard could it be? But, it's 30 miles. And he is right. It's got everything from like the rainforest of the Smokies to all the routes going straight up mountains like in Maine to balds to 6,000-foot peaks. And it's part of the Mountains to Sea Trail as well. And down here in North Carolina, there's also this thing where people hike all of the 40 6,000-foot peaks. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the 40 6,000-foot peaks. And I think the Lobe has 5 or 6 of those 6,000-foot peaks. And
That's brutal hiking right there.
The first time I did the Lobe Trail was in August, and it was blueberry season. And it was absolutely, we were eating blueberries for basically 3 days. It was amazing. So it is definitely a hidden little gem. It's actually, it's in a little town called Brevard, North Carolina. Literally, you could throw a rock and hit the Smoky Mountains. So it's down in the corner of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
Nice. And then you also, the Wonder Trail, I was looking this one up out in Washington.
That one
the
looks
Wonderland Trail.
super awesome.
Yeah. What was that experience like? Because Mount Rainier is no joke. My uncle lives out there, and I went out there once, and I was like, oh, wow.
No, Mount Rainier, it scared me the first time I saw it and what I mean by that is I had never seen a mountain like that. I was in such awe and amazement, and I just couldn't stop looking at it. And no matter where you go, like in the Seattle area and surrounding area, everywhere you turn, and people there will say, oh my God, the mountain's out. And everywhere you turn, you see Mount Rainier. It is phenomenal. So a couple girlfriends and you have to go through a permit process, like what seems to be happening to a lot of the trails out west, to get a permit to hike Mount Rainier. It's just a little under 100 miles, and you basically put your permit in for clockwise or counterclockwise. And we spent 10 absolutely, I can't even describe it, phenomenal days, circling Mount Rainier. And basically, we went counterclockwise. So every morning you get and all day long, the mountain is on your left shoulder. And, you'd hike for a little, you'd be in the green tunnel, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my God, there it is. And it's just it's just unlike any other hiking that I've ever done. When you see waterfalls and stuff, you're in amazement, but you are in amazement around Mount Rainier. And the glaciers, it's just like, and Gut Hook has Mount Rainier or the Wonderland Trail on the app, and has very phenomenal, like you could be standing at a point and it gives you very descriptive descriptions of the glaciers you're looking at on Mount Rainier. And we would stand there, what seemed like for hours, looking for people that were climbing Mount Rainier.
Really?
It is phenomenal. And I was just afraid because Mount Rainier in the Pacific Northwest is known for a lot of rain and things like that. And we were like, oh my God, it's going to rain on us every day. So I was like prepared for rain. I was going to be freezing. We had 10 days, no rain, clear skies, like something you just don't repeat again. Phenomenal.
That sounds like such an amazing trip because, my experience and your experiences sounds like it's mostly been East Coast. And then, I've been out west. I've traveled out west a little bit. And, I always call it like a little sampler platter. Went out there for a couple of weeks one summer, and you drive around and you see all this stuff and you're like, this isn't anything like what's back home. And it's just so, I think the thing that blows me away being from Ohio is the scale. Like Mount Rainier, you could drive for 3 hours east or west or whatever, east, and it's still in the back rear view mirror. You're just like, oh my God. And like, it's so, like, people climb to the top of that. I don't even know. Like, we're talking in the 10,000 foot range. What is Mount Rainier? Probably like
15, oh, Mount Rainier is 14 something. Yeah, it's the highest glacial mountain in the lower 48. And then you have, oh my goodness, I can't think of the highest point. It's on the John Muir Trail. It's Mount Whitney. So Mount Whitney is the highest non-glacial point, I guess, in the lower 58. So yeah, Mount Rainier is, I don't know the exact, but it's just under 15,000 feet.
Just, I can't even fathom that right now. Being in Ohio, there's a cornfield outside of my window, and I'm just like, here we are. So do you got any other kind of section trails or section hikes you're working on currently, or you got any big plans for anything coming up?
Well, I started repeating the Appalachian Trail in 2010, started taking friends out, going to my favorite points and things like that. And when people wanted to go hiking, I was like, I'm in. Okay, yeah, I can go 3 days this weekend. And then when I got done with my first section hike, I was like, no, don't do it. Don't start looking at what you've done. Don't do it. But I did it. And I'm actually, at the time when I started really thinking about re-hiking or re-section hiking the Appalachian Trail, I added everything up. And right now I'm just under 700 miles from completing it again. So, yeah, you know what happens. It's like,
you can't stop once you start.
I can't stop. I told you it's my first love. And now I'm like, that would be so cool. So if I could put this together, in the next couple years, I will have section hiked the Appalachian Trail twice in 16 years. I know that's crazy to even think about.
That is an unfathomable amount of miles. So you're talking like 4,000 plus. I mean, plus all the other trails you've did. Plus, that's a lot. Like, I don't think like when I talk, it's a lot of. To the people I know based out of Ohio, it's always like these numbers, they don't comprehend them because nobody does that around here. Like, you talk thousands and thousands of miles, like it's so impressive. Even, I've through hiked and I'm always still like, that's such a big number. Like, you talk about the average amount of walking that someone does in a year, you're talking in like the couple of mile range. Maybe you get into like the mid 70s or 100 or something, and then you start talking to these people that have done these big miles, and you're just like, it hurts my brain to think about. That's like the definition of like sticking to it. Like, you never give up.
Well, really, you know what, Paul, if I'm being honest, I have to keep hiking so I can eat. I mean, let's get real.
I feel you there.
And here's another number for you this is crazy. Yeah, the mileage is crazy, and thank God I still have my knees and my hips are doing good, and stuff hurts, but you just keep moving. But in my local park, I have lived in where I live now since 2002, and I have a local nature preserve that's a couple miles from the house. And I actually used to trail run a lot, so I started trail running over there. And I went real low on the numbers. I think I've hiked in 18 years over 25,000 miles in that park. Is that not crazy? That's ridiculous.
Well, my wife and I were just talking yesterday. We went for a walk at the park because it's like the first day that's above 50 degrees here in a while. And I was thinking, the trail we hike usually is like 3 miles or something. And then we see a lot of people on the first like half mile, and then we get out to these 3-5 mile sections or so, 3 to 5 miles, and there's nobody out here. And we're like, why is it? And we're like, I think we're just so skewed because like we used to do 18 miles and we're like 3, whatever, that's no big deal. And then that adds up like over, I don't even keep track, and I don't want to know how many miles I hiked. It's scary.
No, it's a lot. I'm sure it's a ton. Yeah. And I don't keep track either. But when you start, it's like, oh my God, I'm surprised. I haven't had to have both knees replaced and both hips replaced.
Well,
I think that's they're intended to be used a little bit. That's kind of why they exist. So I think you're onto something here.
um,
One thing that has always bothered me about the through hiker section hiker debate is like even the circle of people I know, there's always like this weird contention, like even on the trail, like, oh, they'd say stuff on the through hiker side, like, oh, it's just a section hiker. And I'm like, I could never personally understand that mindset because like that bothers me so much. And like, you're the first section hiker that I know that I've talked to about the Appalachian Trail at all. So like, it's a really good perspective, I think, for a lot of people that are through hikers to get like, you've done the same amount of miles, if not more than probably most. Cause everybody I know that is through hiked is done. Like they've done any more hiking of any sort of like long distance, but you guys are section hiking continuously. Like, you're racking up more miles than I probably ever will. And it's so awesome. And you know, like, I'm really happy that you have a podcast dedicated to it because like, I don't like that contention. I don't know if you have a viewpoint on that or if you want a viewpoint on it or if you've dealt with any like adversity with that, but I think it's so stupid.
I know. Well, I mean, I don't know if if I have an opinion or a viewpoint, but one of the things, is I used to be very jealous of through hikers because even though I was out on the trail and I was doing the same thing as through hikers, even though I could only be out there so long, is I wanted trail legs and I wanted, that community of going up the trail. And now they call it a tramily. I mean, we just called it a trail family or people you're hanging out with. But I never really had that communal type piece. And I'm very engrossed in the Appalachian Trail and I know what that feels like, but I would be jealous because even as a section hiker, I would get in with through hikers because the middle of June, the further north I went on the trail, I would be in through hiker packs or bubbles now they call them. And
yeah,
and I would just be like, oh man, I wish I could have started in Georgia. And, and people would, and I would actually introduce myself at, oh, I'm just out for a sec, like downplaying who I was. And after a while, I was just like, what am I doing that for? Like, I have more knowledge about gear and what's going on out here. And I've met all the trail angels that y'all have met. And I know all the shuttle drivers. And I've actually not only hiked the trail, but I've also probably driven to the majority of trailheads and been to the towns and things like that. So I just kind of stopped that mentality. I actually don't even know when. And I really, really, really think that there are a lot more section hikers out there than there are through hiker because a through hiker, that's a low percentage. You do have to give up 6 months of your life. And, a lot of through hikers, they quit their jobs, they put their families on hold, or they put on hold having a family. And that's a sacrifice. That's a lot of sacrifice. And I sacrificed my vacations. So instead of going on a cruise or laying on the beach, I can't lay on the beach anyway, but
yeah,
yeah, or going on extravagant, wine tours and things like that. I went hiking. So I sacrificed that, but I don't even look at that as a sacrifice anymore. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. And I just met more people like me more and more. And I was like, why do we keep talking about through hikers? Why am I listening to through hikers? Like, we have a lot of knowledge too. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a stance or it's just like, we need a voice and we need to start talking about our experience.
Well, and it's always such a bummer because on your podcast, I hear a lot of people say like, I'm just a section hiker. And it's like such a bummer, but like, I feel like it's just like anything that becomes competitive over time, there's just like build these divisions up for no reason. Like, and then you get in the through hiker world and it's like, oh, I'm ultra light. And oh, well, I'm doing it in 4 months. And you're just like, we're just walking, people. Like, get over it.
That's right. We're just walking.
Like, it's supposed to be fun. And yeah, you have your own, it's all personal. Did you have any reason besides growing up outdoors and just being in love with the outdoors that you wanted to do the Appalachian Trail specifically, or does it like hit you one day like I'm gonna do this, or was it just like over time like I think I'm just gonna do this whole thing?
I think it was just over time, I'm going to do this. And I think because, you're in Ohio now, but I grew up in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and the majority of my family is still there. And I think the Appalachian Trail was the first known national scenic trail. And I remember my dad, talking about Earl Schaefer and Grandma Gatewood. And even my mom was like, oh, Grandma Gatewood, she's just a phenomenal lady. And we would get like newspaper clips and things like that about people like in the late 70s that were out hiking the Appalachian Trail. And I just remember thinking, that is the coolest thing. Like they are rebels. Like those people are just defying society and they're going out and hiking on this trail. And,
Yeah.
they're so remote. And I remember there's probably one specific book. It's Walk Across America. And the gentleman's name eludes me right now. And I remember my dad read that book and I read that book and he went out his front door and literally with his dog hiked across America and went through small towns, got jobs, really engrossed himself in America and everything that America had to offer. And, people were inviting him in, to their homes. And, that was trail magic for him. And he was just welcomed with open arms across America. And part of his trip was through the Appalachian Trail. And I think after I read that book, I decided that's it. I want an adventure like he had in this book. And he also met his wife as he walked across America. And he did write a second book. I think it's Walk Across America Part 2. But yeah, phenomenal. I mean, that is a phenomenal book for anybody looking for anything to read. Walk Across America. It will want you to get out there and just experience America.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think I bought that book at a thrift sale or something for like 25 cents just because it had like a hiking picture on it. It's sitting on my bookshelf right now, so I know exactly the one you're talking about. I can't say I've read it yet, but I have it. That's a start.
When I read that book, I was highlighting stuff. I mean, I went way out of my norm because, I'm not a huge reader or anything. I mean, I'm not into, English or anything like that. Like I hated English. I hated reading books. But when I got that book, highlighters came out and I was going to do this. And I think that book was the first indication, and I didn't even realize it myself. That's who I was.
Mm-hmm. It's like once you become like a backpacker, it just like consumes you. Like, it's just like your whole life just gets dedicated to this weird sport that like, it's just like, it's basically walking with stuff and camping combined. But like, it's all I want to do whenever I get vacation time. Like, where can we go backpacking? What can I do to backpack more? And like, it's so awesome to just be able to be like self-sufficient in a way because we're all so like dependent on modern technology and stuff now. I don't know if you get this like sense of freedom out there where you can like not have to respond to anybody for 8 days and just be like, I'm good.
Yes, I do. And another thing that happens to me that happened very early on is every time I went out and I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing, every time I went out on a section hike, I would come home and I would just be like, oh my God, I don't need this. I don't need this. I decluttered my life every time I got home from a section hike. And, I didn't know at the time, nobody called it minimalism back then. It was just, I don't need this crap in my life. It's like leave no trace. We used to call it give a hoot, don't pollute. I mean, we just, back then it was get rid of this crap. Like you don't need it kind of thing. So.
Well, we've gotten really good at like putting a term on every single thing and, minimalism, tramily, bubble. It's just like, gotta label it. The more popular it gets, the more labels it gets, I guess. But yeah, it's, and so in a relative way, with this whole obviously like COVID thing going down and everybody's kind of stuck at home, I feel like I've talked to a lot of my thru hiker friends, and I'm like, I feel like we've prepared for this already a long time ago. Like, I'll just eat what's in the cupboard and, whatever. It sucks being inside, but you can still go to the park and chill out. And I don't know if you feel more like prepared with that or like okay with it, because I'm like, I'll just set it out,
Yeah. I mean, even when all the whole toilet paper thing started, I was like, well, that's no problem for me. I got toilet paper in my day packs. I got toilet paper in a couple backpacks. I mean, and no problem. I mean, I've got extra toilet paper. I've got extra water filters. Like,
yeah, I do find random rolls of toilet paper now and then in a Ziploc bag. Like, where did this come from? Dig in a backpack somewhere. There's bound to be a roll.
But yeah, toilet paper's always been my luxury item on the trail. Like I'm that person, and plus I'm a female, so you could make fun of it. But I'm that one that you see pull out their, whatever toiletry kit, and it's huge because I got the big roll of Charmin or whatever.
Hey, I do not want to be caught on the trail without toilet paper. That is like the scare. That is worse than a bear, a moose, Sasquatch, whatever you want to see out there. I would much rather run into that than get caught without toilet paper. That is like an ultimate nightmare.
Yeah, that is a fear. Like big, it's real, people. The fear is real.
Well, my thought was everybody else in America finally just realized it. Like they're they're the ones, they just figured this out. I was like, I've known this for a long time.
Exactly.
Speaking of animals, do you ever have any cool encounters? That's always like my favorite story with like bears, moose, anything.
I dream of seeing. Yeah, I've never seen them. I never saw a moose until I got to Maine. And sadly, it was actually driving on the road into Baxter State Park, and running across the road came this huge moose. So as far as moose, sadly, I've never actually seen one on the trail. Bear, let's see, Smoky Mountains, Shenandoah, the popular areas. New Jersey saw 2-3 bears in New Jersey. Huge bears in New Jersey. I don't know what they're eating, but
why are there so many in New Jersey? I could never figure that out.
I don't know. Somebody's eating them, and they're all like hanging out, and
I just assumed they were all like Bon Jovi fans. I didn't really know what. I don't know what bears are doing up there in New Jersey. But you didn't have any like crazy tent run-ins where they're like outside your tent or like
scaring the crap out of you?
No, this past summer, not on the Appalachian Trail, but we did have a bear standoff, so to speak, at Mount Rainier on the Wonderland Trail. So we were coming down the trail, and Mama Bear and her cub were on the right side of the trail, and we scared the cub, and the cub went across the trail and up a tree. So guess what? We were in the, situation that nobody wants to be in. Yep. In between the mama and the cub. And we did all the traditional blowing whistles, hey bear, throwing rocks, trying to distract, the bear to look a different way. And she literally laid down. And we were an hour and 20 minutes later, finally, when we all got quiet, the little bear came down the tree, went across the trail, went across to mama, and finally they took off. So it was, I can't even describe it, because I felt like, am I in the zoo? Am I at Mount Rainier? I'm at the most gorgeous place I've ever been. And a bear has literally laid down on the trail. It was great. I mean, I don't know. You were high and scared at the same time. I don't even know how to describe that. I mean, you got this adrenaline rush, but you were scared to death at the same time.
The whole bear thing is always like a top. I mean, you probably hear it all the time from people. Oh, you go out there and there's bears, and I've never had any bad experiences with them personally. Like, they freak you out in the middle of the night when they're, rummaging around in your campsite or whatever. But eventually you're just like, whatever, it's a bear. Like, that they could hurt you, but you come to realize that they're not going to, just like statistically, and you just kind of like deal with it.
Right.
People have a hard time with that, but one question that I always really like to get out of people, and it might be selfish on my end, is like, what is your dream backpacking trip? If you had like unlimited funding, you could go anywhere in the world, borders open, like where would you go for however long? Could be a day, could be 5 years.
Well, I have two, but the first one, I really want to go to Switzerland. I mean, I want to personally see the Alps, Mont Blanc, like, but I don't know if that's in Italy, Switzerland, all, and do the Tour du Mont Blanc Trail. Like, I just dream of going over there and just seeing the Alps. I mean, I can't get it out of my mind. So hopefully one day after all this, after we get through all the COVID-19 stuff, I definitely want to go to Switzerland 100%. And I guess number two, I want to go to Australia. And I don't have a clue about the trails. I think it's called the Biblium Track, if I'm not mistaken. I would love to get out in Australia and do some hiking and see the koala bears and things like that. So those would be my top two.
The Australia one sounds a little terrifying.
The
You
only
don't
thing
want
you
a
ever
koala
see.
bear attacking you.
Well, I'm mostly concerned with like all the pictures I see of people like there's a 6-foot poisonous snake under my house. I'm like, oh, well, I definitely don't want that in my tent, but
I don't know much about.
I don't know much about Australia other than it's gigantic, it's hot, and there's sharks. That's about the extent of my knowledge of Australia.
Well, then there's the Great Barrier Reef bringing up the sharks. So there's that whole, seeing the Great Barrier Reef kind of thing. So, and there are things like that I want to do too. But yeah, Switzerland first and foremost.
That would be amazing. Like that's like the classic artwork you see of mountains is all just like Switzerland. Like all those cheesy when you type in like nature background on Google, that's like what comes up and you're just drooling over it.
And I'm going to go all cheesy too. I'm going to go like hut to hut and I'm going to eat really good meals and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I've been back to the White Mountains since the Appalachian Trail. And I'm like, I'm totally staying at the huts. I'm not camping. I'm not doing anything. Like, this is going to be great. This is vacation now. I don't need to suffer anymore. And it was awesome. I heard thru hikers complain about the huts all the time. And I was like, hey, when you're not broke, they're amazing. They have food. They have beds. Yeah. I guess one thing that I'm curious about, because I know why I started my podcast, but what kind of got you into this podcast world? Because like once I busted into it, there's so many awesome people I get to meet all the time just randomly. And it's like, how did you get into it? It's such a growing yet still kind of niche, but like not thing. It's very weird.
So yeah, it is crazy. And it's awesome because I've met a lot of different podcasters on it. It seems like the podcasters are on Instagram and I've met a lot of people through that. But the Jester Section Hiker is actually part of a hiking. It's the Hiking Radio Network. And the Hiking Radio Network has several different podcasts. The flagship podcast is Steve Adams' Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. There is a niche podcast called The Trail Dames, and it's anything and everything, women getting into hiking, anything you want to know. It's like a women's world of hiking. It's called The Trail Dames. And then I got to know Steve Adams because originally I reached out to him because, his podcast was Through Hike, Through Hike, Through Hike, Through Hike. And I reached out to him and I said, well, I'm a section hiker. Would you consider having a section hiker on your podcast? And he emailed me back and he said, yeah, let's do it. So I actually ended up going on his podcast in 2017 and he hiked the trail again in 2019. And I met up with him and he said, how about doing a section hiker podcast on the Hiking Radio Network? And I was like, say what? I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm a podcast junkie, but I never really thought about, getting into it. And I thought, you know what? Let me go do some research. So I literally looked up anything and everything I could to see if there was another podcast out there focusing on section hikers. And there's not. So I said, yeah, let's do it. let's have section hikers on. Let's give section hikers a voice. And, I am, I started December the 1st. So 4 or 5 months into this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm already starting to think of ideas and how to change things and how to get better and how to interview people. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun.
Well, and I really like the format of your podcast because you cover everything within like an hour and 45 minutes. You get someone on, you talk about their experience, and as a host, you're great. I mean, it's so entertaining. Like I catch myself all the time, I'm like, I need to shut up, but you like let your guests tell their story, and then it goes into this awesome gear segment that's very like specific to topics. Then you open it up to questions from fans about gear, and it's like an encyclopedia in every episode. You've covered so many different situations, and it's not just the Appalachian Trail specific. I mean, you're talking to people all over the world, all over the country, and that's so awesome. And like, I'm glad you're giving section hikers a voice because I mean, nobody else is.
It's all through hiker,
nobody else is.
Like you said.
There's how many through hiker podcasts are there? I could probably name 100 if I thought about it,
Right.
And I did notice that like from episode 1 to I think you're at 13 as of today, the quality went like exponentially up really quick. Like you got on it. Like sometimes you hear podcasts that are out there for like 3 years and it still sounds really bad. You got on it super fast. You got this nice Shure SM7B there. You're a pro. Went to pro from like 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds. And as you know, there's a lot of
it like scared me at the beginning. I didn't know. I didn't know about these mics. And I was going on like watching YouTube guys like Casey Neistat and stuff like that. I was like, what are they using? What's Tim Ferriss using? Seriously, I'm looking at Tim Ferriss going, yeah, what's he using? And here I am, Jester section hiker. So, literally.
I did the same thing, so don't feel bad.
But, as what I would say podcast, I don't even listen to music hardly anymore. I'm always listening to different podcasts and different people, all about different stuff. And the number one thing is, you got to have good sound or they're not going to listen. And those first couple episodes, even with the gear guy, we just couldn't get his sound right. And I was like, you know what? It's just got to go out. And the thing is, if people like your podcast, they're also forgiving if they like you. And, people, we don't get paid for this.
No.
And this is, and we're doing this. I'm doing this as a labor of love, to give back to not only the Appalachian Trail, but, to the community and get hikers' voices out there. And it's a way to give back. And it's like a second job. And I'm not complaining. But I also want to make sure the quality of the show, the sound is there because I want people to come back and listen. And I don't want the guests to be embarrassed about being on my podcast. And that's what I'm concerned with is, to get the guest story out there and to make sure and we're still working on the sound. Nothing's perfect. I'm not in a studio. You're in your house. I'm in my house. There you go. We're in our houses, so we're doing the best we can. So what is this mic? A SMB? You know what it is.
SM7B. Well, the funny thing is I've been a sound guy pretty much my whole life, and this is still really hard because it's like, oh, people are actually listening to this.
Yeah.
Were you?
Like this is I just went off on a tangent now, but it's my show, so I can do whatever I want.
What you want?
The learning curve is pretty crazy on this podcasts, and like I went from the sound was easy. I'm like, yeah, sound cool, whatever. And then you start throwing video in it. And I'm like, I haven't used Skype since I was 18, trying to figure out all this crazy stuff with interviewing. And then you have to learn how to interview people. It's like, I think it's for adrenaline junkies like us as hikers, we just can't get enough of it. You got to just be like on your toes all the time. And it's so like just fun. I don't know. There's no way to put it.
It is fun. It's kind of like, it's a little bit of a high because you're going to talk about, hiking and, I try to pump myself up literally before I go on. I'm watching YouTubes of people hiking and, kind of getting like jazzed up and listening to other people's podcasts. And because, as a podcaster, sometimes it's hard to get people to open up. And, it takes 10, 15 minutes, a couple questions, and then people start opening up. And everybody you have on has a different personality. So you kind of got to morph and form to who your guest is. And it might be, I don't know if it's easier for me because I am a teacher and I'm doing that all the time. And it's tough. It's hard, but it's fun at the same time. And it gets me pumped and jazzed up. And I do get nervous because I want people to listen. So I do take recommendations. Hey, if anybody knows how to help me with the sound, come on over is what I say.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, I do want to say on the record, as someone from Ohio, that I think personally that Appalachian is the way cooler way to say Appalachian Trail than Appalachian. I've heard so many people on your podcast argue back and forth about that. And as a Northerner, I will say it sounds 100,000 times cooler. And I know you agree with me. Hey everyone, just wanted to say thank you again for checking out the Aptitude Outdoors podcast here on YouTube. Really want to give a shout out to Julie Jester Gayheart for coming on to the show. Super great guest. You should definitely head over to her Instagram, Jester Hikes, and check that out. Also make sure you check out her podcast going by the same name, Jester Hikes. Super great, tons of great information on there. And I really want to say thanks again for coming on the show. If you didn't notice, we had a few little technical difficulties there at the end. We lost a few minutes. But hey, you can't win them all. Thank you all again. We will catch you on the next Aptitude Outdoors podcast.